So, welcome everyone to tonight's installment of our NPS and Power Hours. We've been meeting every 2 weeks to talk about a new topic, to learn from our experts across the union, whether it's our members who are leading our chapters or whether it's our really incredible staff across the country who are helping represent members through negotiations or legislation, or tonight. We'll hear from someone working with our members through representation. Um, Really excited tonight. We're going to be talking about seasonals. This is a big topic that I know, whether you're a seasonal employee or not, can impact everyone across the Park Service. Knowing that who's going to show up year after year and do the work alongside of you, that they're going to have the tools and resources to do the job, and that you all are going to be treated with respect and dignity is really important. So, with that, I'm really excited to say that we have an incredible guest with us tonight. We're really lucky to have um, Michael McAuley, our national counsel for our Chicago field office. We're really lucky because after, I believe, over 44 years, Mike, he's going to be retiring soon. And so I'm glad to be able to soak up and continue to soak up the wealth of knowledge and institutional experience that Mike has with our union and with representing federal employees, and a long, fast commitment to the labor movement, especially there in Chicago. So really excited to have you here. Welcome. I don't know if
Thank
you wanted
you.
to say a piece about yourself before I jump into questions.
I'm just honored to be working with you guys, and I'm grateful that you folks from the parks are thinking about joining us. I think we can make a difference. I've devoted my entire professional career for that, and I know we have made a difference in so many people's lives. To truth to power, do the next right thing, making sure that um, you have a voice. And I know, coming from the geographically challenged location of Chicago, we don't have a lot of parks out here, but I greatly respect what you guys do. So I'm happy to try to answer as many questions as I can tonight and give you some insights into what value NTU brings to the workplace.
All right, well, let's jump in. So I've got a series of questions that I'm going to ask tonight, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So feel free to drop those into the chat as you're thinking about them, and we might pepper them in as we see them, but we'll definitely make sure that we've got time to get dedicated questions out at the end. So to start, my first couple of questions are kind of around what I deemed education, negotiation, and legislation, because it seems
Okay.
like a lot of our stuff kind of comes down to these areas. Can you, to start us off, can you kind of briefly explain the difference between, or maybe give examples of, what are types of topics that we would negotiate around versus what are topics that would be covered by legislation? Because it seems when you're a federal employee, things fall into one of those two buckets often.
Right. Yeah, so much of, the ground rules of federal employment are, contained in statutory or regulatory, provisions. I think when the first order of business, I think, for us who do this for a living and for our local reps is to actually know what these laws are that impact you. That information is power. So, with respect to seasonal employment, which I guess is the topic, for tonight, um, you look in, the Code of Federal Regulations, and that establishes some parameters for that, which is, there has to be, it's at 5 CFR Part 340, if anybody's interested in that. And it basically just defines what seasonal employment is. It requires that there be an employment agreement, a seasonal employment agreement that outlines the terms, um, and some other stuff. But basically, so you have that. And then you have different kinds of different appointments in the federal service, like, career conditional term, and, hours of work and stuff like that. So we learn those things. And then we bargain, off of that. Um, what are some of the things that we can negotiate, for seasonals? Release recall, access, to overtime, putting on the overtime lists, um, stuff like that, notice of furloughs, and then when we have issues that sometimes need a legislative fix or we need pressure put on the agency, we use public relations. We have a big political action committee. We drop money to various members of Congress if there happens to be someone who sits on an appropriations committee for this particular department, and we make noise to them about, an issue that people are treating badly, and the head of the agency has to go up there and, justify their budget. They get asked a lot of questions while they're up there, and we put kind of, heat on them to that way. So, and we use the media, like we've done in the past, try to shame them or expose stupid practices to get the general public, involved. So, I mean, it depends on the issue.
Um, okay. That actually went into answering one of my other questions was how do we hold agencies accountable? And uh, uh, it sounds like you covered a lot of the different ways of how we hold them
Um,
accountable.
Well, what we try to hold, if we negotiate, let's say if we negotiate something in a contract, like we have, my experience with seasonals has not been with the Park Service as much. It's been with another agency that represented a large seasonal population for many, many years. The Internal Revenue Service, where, everybody has to file their tax returns by April 15th, and they hire a whole lot of seasonals for filing season. So we've had a variety of issues, there. And what we do, first we negotiate, issues in our contract. So a lot of the issues that we've had were involve access to overtime, um, access to being able to compete for permanent positions if they want. A release recall process where what we negotiate either by seniority or a combination of your performance appraisals, when you're going to get released and when you're going to get recalled. We've bargained, there's a lot of complicated rules about seasonal access to health insurance. You have to be able to have an agreement that has 6 months, we convinced IRS that like if you put four in the agreement, and we can extend it, that'll give enough, for health insurance. And so if people are going to be, for whatever reason, they need to be furloughed based on workload early, they can use their leave, they can swap with other people to stay on longer, to try to be creative and, get people the maximum benefits that they could have. Notices of furloughs, we bargain, you have to give, notice of that, so people can prepare. Voluntary furloughs if you need, time off, and what are the basic rights and that seasonals have with respect to FMLA and stuff like that. So we kind of put that in our contracts. So everybody knows what's going on. We're all operating on the same page.
That's a really good segue into in a previous conversation I had with you, you mentioned that a large part of representing seasonal employees, at least at the IRS, is providing education and support on accessing existing rights and benefits. What are some of the
Right.
topics that seasonal employees ask about that you all end up providing counsel on?
Well, a lot of them involve, um, are they entitled to unemployment benefits? And, how do I help do that? And if you're a career conditional seasonal, you're not, and you get health insurance, okay, and you are, let's say your season is 7 months, and and a lot of people want to have those seasons. So a lot of the people who work in seasonal, I'm sure at the Park Service, are very interesting people that have bigger lives outside of working in the parks, and they're artists or they're writers or they do all kinds of different things. I've met some fascinating people in my travels to the parks and working with the seasonals at the Internal Revenue Service. But one of the things that they want to have is they want to have health insurance. They need that coverage. And so what happens when they're furloughed for their season? Who pays for that? Um, and we've arranged, and there's regulations on this. And NTU actually worked very hard on this particular regulation. I wrote the comments to it that agencies, when you're period of furlough, you still keep your health insurance, but they pay the full premium. And then when you come back, you owe them that. You owe them that time while, the portion of the premium that the agency paid while you're furloughed, and then how does that get paid back? And we negotiate these provisions that allow for like this repayment thing, and to maximize it over the course of your season, so your paycheck isn't hit as hard when you first come back and get a big hit, to pay the health insurance, that kind of stuff. Um, we also experienced, there was, kind of each place has its own culture, and I'm sure each park has its own culture. And maybe, like some of these directors that we've dealt with at these places, like they think they're feudal lords, and they rule, and they have different ways of doing things. So we work really hard to be consistent, and try to take the best practices for employees from, like Fresno and move that, to Memphis, or to from Cincinnati to Ogden, or something like that, and play all that a bit, which has been helpful. Particularly when it came to some of the issues with, getting seasonals into perm positions. I mean, we recently, well, not recently. I recently read this case, because of the government shutdown, which was, the nightmare it is. And we did a case for seasonals in 2018, for instance, where magically, just before the government shutdown was supposed to happen, the agency decided we're going to furlough you now because we don't need your. And then magically, after the government shutdown was over, they called them back and said, oh, by the way, we don't have to pay you during the shutdown because you were furloughed because of lack of work. And we're like, so we, did the deep dive and looked at the workload and did a case and found like, no, this was a sham. That was a sham furlough. And you just did this to avoid having to pay back pay to these folks after, Congress funded the government. So you got to pay, thousands of seasonals, however long the shutdown was. I think that year was like 7 days or something. And we also have provisions in our contract that say, oh, by the way, you also have to give a minimum of 5 days notice before you're going to furlough somebody. And they didn't do that. So we got an extra 5 days on top of that because they didn't give them the proper notice. So that's some of the legal stuff that we do for seasonals, as an
Yeah.
example.
In this, you mentioned conversions to permanent employees. Can you talk a little bit about how NTEU has helped seasonal employees convert or move into, like, create pathways for moving into permanent positions?
Yeah, I mean, this has been something that was a long process because, I mean, there are a lot of seasonals that wanted this, or others that did not. But obviously, the only difference between the work that seasonals and permanent employees did was their work schedules. They did the same work. It was just when they did it. So obviously they should be able to compete. So we convinced the IRS, to allow, they would put these vacancy announcements that only permanent employees are allowed to apply. We put pressure on them, to allow that to happen because you hear good people who want to work year round. Why would you not want to put them first and, put them ahead of people who were like coming on off the street, you know, had no experience at all? So, we kind of shamed them into doing that. We took some cases up, won one, lost one, put a lot of pressure on them, and they said this is a smart business practice to do this, you know. And so we were very successful at that. And then when the agencies wanted to, if they had they had the money in their budget and they had the authority to hire rather than announce these jobs to let and have seasonals have to compete for them, they would just say we want to convert X number of seasonal employees to perms. and they would do that, by seniority, basically. And we would, we worked with that, to get that system set up. So that's the kind of stuff that we've done.
Um, uh, is I'm trying to think of, I'm not sure if this is related. Uh, we have job swap programs at IRS that I believe seasonals are eligible for as well. That's maybe only in the case of RIFs, but um, can you clarify that?
Yeah, well, we have job swap programs that we originally, and this is how when you bargain a contract, for instance, you want to bargain like when alternate work schedules first came up, and I don't know if I think this is maybe a relevant issue for people in the, work in the parks, depending on your job. I don't know, like you could have a 549, a 410, you know, flexi-tour with credit hours, whatever. And so when you bargain those kinds of things, for instance, like, you know, um, to get management when it first came out, this was like in the 1980s when this first came out. Management wasn't comfortable letting people, telework 4 or 5 days a week at home. I mean, because like if I can't watch you, you're not working, and you're going to be sitting on your deck drinking coffee in your underwear while your neighbor is going to look say, isn't that a federal employee wasting my tax dollar? That kind of stuff. And we're going to have surprise inspections, at your house and all that. So you start out, it's okay, well, let's do it 1 or 2 days a week as a pilot. Let's see how it goes. Let like 75% of the people try it and move it, up that way. So that's, how we would do it. So we originally, started job swap because of the different work schedules and different kind of appointments that people had. It was strictly in a riff. And basically when that happened was at one of these places, all this technology was coming. It was making some of these jobs, paper-driven jobs with superfluous is what management called them. I said, they were, redundant if we were in Europe. And, but there were and so they offered buyouts to people. So, and we negotiated 3 buyouts and all these other mitigation strategies to try to make sure that no one would get riffed. And in that process, we agreed that a seasonal and a perm could swap. So a seasonal, let's say, who wanted to continue working, who was affected by this, would swap, with a permanent employee, and that permanent employee would take the buyout that the seasonal employee would be entitled to, and that employee would then, get the perm position. Um, we've been able to get seasonal swaps in like different work locations. We've had a lot of people who wanted to swap geographic locations. A lot of people want to go to Utah. A lot of people want to go to Austin, and so people, could swap, their positions to get there. But we have not negotiated at this point a swap to actually get, a seasonal to a perm and vice versa outside of a staff reduction situation. The agencies and really probably because of the fact that, the seasonals that we've represented, um, the swap from, seasonal to perm position, um, over the course of time, you know, the, the way it's actually worked is that the seasonals the population has really shrunk because of the change in, technology and everything. So we haven't gotten to that point yet. We only did it in a riff, but it was creative. It was a way to solve a problem. Sorry for that long answer.
Sticking on riffs, because I know that it's really fresh in people's minds. Uh,
Oof.
what rights do seasonal employees have during a riff, and how does the union represent employees in that case?
Well, seasonal employees have rights, just like everybody else. And, the only issue is like what competitive level they're in, you know. And They create competitive areas, competitive levels, and there's probably just a straight up competitive level for seasonal. There's a straight up competitive level for seasonals. It's not the same as it would be for perms. You would have a separate competitive level, but they still have to go through all the RIF stuff. They have to go through the retention registers. They have to look at your last three appraisals. They have to look at your elective service. They have to, and your veteran status and all that stuff. And you have all those rights. Seasonals
And the
have those
union
rights.
makes sure that agencies follow those statutory rights.
Well, yeah, that's like we're there to kind of police and administer not only our collective bargaining agreement, but the law. And in my experience with RIFs, and the ones we've seen, happen during the first 9 months or 9 years, as it feels like, of this administration, from my perspective, um, they've tried to RIF, a number of people in some agencies where we represent, and we recently just filed, appeals for I'm sorry, 600 folks at HHS. And looking at these retention registers and just seeing this stuff, it's unquestioned they screwed it up. RIFs are complicated. Agencies in the past did everything they could to avoid riffing. That's why they offered buyouts and Vera Visup and and engaged in all these mitigation strategies to try to avoid this process because it is complicated, it's expensive, and it's disruptive. And so the RIF cases that I've done RIF cases at the MSPB over my career, they come in fits and starts. And most of them settled, I'd say three-quarters of them settled before the hearing because the agency's messed up, the retention registers because they don't know what they're doing. And now they're going to rely on AI, and good luck with that.
I think it's a really good point and reminder that even if there are regulations, that even under any administration, the agency could be fallible, but it's really important to know
No,
that you
yeah.
have backup that's looking and making sure that they actually follow what the law says.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's we're there to keep them honest and to keep it and make sure they do it right. And if they don't, they pay.
Yeah. Speaking of pay, do you happen to know, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to look into this, if seasonal employees receive step increases? This is something that has come up across the campaign that seasonal employees at NPS do not, and it's been pointed to that the regulations only require those step increases for permanent employees.
Year waiting period, or the 1 year waiting period, the 2 year waiting period, and the 3 year waiting period, and seasonals don't at MPS don't get those. Okay. So are these
No.
okay. Well, I mean, I guess a lot of it would depend on your what kind of appointment you have, whether you have a career conditional appointment or a term appointment. But I mean, that language in that statute that talks about that. I mean, if you look at the other pieces of the U.S. code and they're complicated, for instance, there's a part-time Career Act statute in 5 CFR, I can't, 3 something. But basically it says like, you can work 32 to 40, th 24 to 32 hours a pay period on a part-time work schedule. And your leave accrual rated that way. Your your and your time and grade for purposes of within grade, is proportioned to or prorated that way. So, maybe if you're only working, let's just say, 20 hours a pay period, you're gonna have your year time and grade after 2 years, right? Because you're only working half time. So yeah, I mean, so my understanding is like if you're a seasonal employment does not, and the same thing with our seasonals. If you are, for instance, in the seasonals that we represent, you're on a, let's say you have a 6 to 9 month season, okay? And you're furloughed, let's say after month 6. There's a provision in the Code of Federal Regulations that says, okay, that 6 month of service is good, toward you within grade, and 2 weeks of your furlough period is also counted toward time and grade. So, you basically you have to work another six, or 5 weeks and 5 months and 2 weeks, and you're eligible for your, step increase. So I think what we're maybe talking about here is these are term appointments that only last like 6 months, and then they just go away and pretended you never worked there before, and you have to start all over again.
I think that might be
Is
the
that what we're talking
case.
about here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with those kind of appointments, that's what they, I mean, they're just giving you a term appointment. Are they saying that like you have to work a minimum of 130 hours
Yeah,
a
I think
month,
they're
is
saying
it?
that they have to
You know,
agree to that 1039 hours in 6 months, and then they're terminated, not furloughed. And then they have to reapply again. And so they're not counting.
reapply
People
again.
could do
Yeah.
this for years upon
So, I
years,
mean,
and that service isn't counted.
well, I mean, that's something we can bargain some of this stuff, but I mean, if it was me on the grand pictures team, I would like this way of treating, hiring terms and pretending that they never worked there before and like not giving them, any credit, toward, within grades. I don't know. I'd have to look and see what the deal is with respect to FERS. I'm assuming, when you're a term and you work a full-time schedule, you still get to accrue leave, right? You accrue, 4 hours of annual and 4 hours sick pay period. I don't know the answer to that.
Um,
But I mean, when we've come into some new units and we look at the regulations and see how that works, and I have to look at the agencies like personnel policies and see. I mean, some of the things, we did this at EPA when we went in with them at first, like they had nothing, and they weren't even following their own manual, and nobody ever questioned about it because nobody knew. And we came in and said, "Duh, you can't do it this way. These were for career ladder promotions," and we arbitrated it, to convince them, and then we won, and then they just rolled over and everything else. So that's kind of how it works. But I mean, I'd have to do some more homework on the term issue because we don't have really terms, at in my experience, I've been worked with a lot of term employment. I've worked with intermittent, employees who are like they don't have pre-scheduled tours of duty, right? And they get, every 2 weeks, okay, you're coming in Thursday on from 1 to 5, you're coming in, Friday from, 8 to 3, and you're off next week, and then da da da. And so they don't even accrue leave. That's like but terms accrue leave, and I think they're entitled to FERS, and I don't know what the terms for 6 months. I'd have to look at one of those seasonal agreements. Do they make them? Do you all get
that was
seasonal
actually a
agreements that
question
you?
that I've asked a few, and I've gotten an answer of no. I'm not sure if anyone on the call uh, has received an actual seasonal agreement, as is required by the statute, because I've mostly heard no. Um,
So this is let me just read this. I don't want to read stuff, but this is 5 CFR section 340.402. Seasonal employment allows an agency to develop an experienced cadre of employees under career employment to perform work which recurs predictably year to year. Consistent with the career nature of the appointment, seasonal employees receive the full benefits authorized to attract and retain a stable workforce. As a result, seasonal employment is appropriate when the work is expected to last at least 6 months during the calendar year. Recurring work that lasts less than 6 months each year is normally best performed for temporary employees. Seasonal employment may not be used as a substitute for full-time employment or as a buffer for the full-time workforce. And then this goes on to say that the employment agreement must be executed between the agency and the seasonal prior to the employee entering on duty, and a minimum agreement must inform the employee that he or she is subject to a periodic release and recall as condition of employment, the maximum minimum period of the employee can expect to work, the basis on which the release and recall procedures will be effected, and the benefits to which the employee will be entitled while in non-pay status. So that's like the floor. That's the law. I mean, the agencies, what do you do with that? It is what it is. They got to give you that. If they don't do it, and you don't have a mechanism to enforce it unless you have a union, in my opinion. And knuckleheads like me that will go in and try to call them on it.
Thanks
Yeah.
for this specific. This has come up a lot and really specific to this seasonal discussion. I know that in the chat, I'm trying to like see questions that are relevant. Basically saying that the administration is basically replacing permanent employees with 1039s in the NPS, and that uh, uh, asking for a commitment from
And
NTE
1039, what is that? What is that?
that they cannot
What is the
exceed.
1039?
They cannot exceed 1,039 hours within a 6 month period. Um, there have been changes over this a few years ago. The way this is generally applied is that that means at any specific park unit. And so you can't work 6 months. More than more than the 1039 hours at one park, but in
Oh,
the
1030.
winter you go
Okay.
to another park, and then and then you can go back to that park and stay a seasonal employee.
Okay. So they're basically like trying to give you 5 months and 29 days, right?
Yep.
So you don't hit that 6 month number. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And
Exactly.
they're doing that not based on workload, not based on it's just based on how they want to save money. That's
Yeah.
interesting, because if you look at one of the cornerstones of the Civil Service Reform Act, which is the law that establishes many of these rights. And Title VII of the Reform Act, establishes the rights for, that says collective bargaining is in the public interest and establishes the rights of unions to organize and sets up unfair labor practices and all that kind of stuff. And other provisions of, the code that set up the MSPB and, the EEOC and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the cornerstone of this statute is the merit system principles and the prohibited personnel practices, right? I mean, the Office of Special Counsel is supposed to enforce that. And it would seem to me that the agency, is kind of engaging in a prohibited personnel practice by manipulating these merit system principles to avoid having to pay the appropriate benefits and not following the regulations in terms of because it's like they've really created a de facto workforce of full-time people, right? By making you go from one park to another at six
Yeah.
months, 6 months,
Mhm.
we're giving you bits, and that seems to be manipulating, the core merit system principle. At least that would be my first take on it. That would be the kind of case that we would kind of be looking at the file, whether it be most likely like a mass grievance, or a ruling, or a request for an opinion from the MSPB. We need a lot of paper from the agency to prove it, so there wouldn't be actual disputes. But that's how like we would begin the process of trying to bring change.
I think that's really helpful for people to hear kind of the how we would start to look at it, and that there are so many different pathways that we
Yeah,
would be looking at, like what is the right, and maybe it's multiple different pathways at once, trying to see which one shakes out. Uh,
right. But it would
yeah,
try to go to the core principle of you're abusing the term, you're abusing the term appointment system, and I mean, term appointments, my understanding, like, and I make a Freedom of Information Act request if we're, certified, make this request we can get under the Union Access to Information statute, I want to see all their approval. Like, does OPM know they're doing this stuff? Did they get authorization from OPM to do this? And so these are the kinds of things, to see if they got, the blessing to like manipulate this process this way, because they may not have called on. I mean, I don't know. I'm
yeah,
just, but these are the things that are popping in my head about what, we begin to look at, but try to basically fix this process of like, term thing and get people appointed to career conditional positions. So you get recalled back to the same park every year. You know what I mean? Or you could swap to another park or something like that. If you're swapping from seasonal to seasonal, I mean,
right.
what would be the bitch about that? As long as you're willing to pay your travel or pay
Yeah,
your moving,
which
right?
they already
Why
do
do they care?
anyway. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no,
So
I
there you
think
go.
that's really helpful. I want to get to a couple more questions, and then I know we've got a few questions I haven't gotten to in the chat yet. Um, And then I want to open it up for a Q&A. So we've talked a little bit actually about recall and release. Um, uh, it
Right.
sounds like IRS employees have some consistency and know when they are going back to work and when they're leaving work, when their season is over, and that they have this information decently in advance. Is that correct? That they know what to expect?
That's the plan. Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Yeah, they kind of know what this filing season is going to be, but yeah, I mean, they for recalling people. I mean, they have a recall list, and you have to provide them with good information, and they call you. And they ask you want to come back, and you say when, and they say tomorrow, and you say I have a dentist appointment or I'm bring whatever, and like, well, but I can come back next week. And they're like, okay, and you come back then, or and then they mail you a letter confirming it. So it's really kind of informal in many ways, um, in that regard. But you have to give them like the good information, like how to get in touch with you, because IRS the agents get really pissed if they can't find you, you know, and that's annoying. Um, For furlough, that's really the bigger issue that we've had. When are they furloughing people? Um, and how do they figure that out? Um, and depending on like what kind of work you do, sometimes that work will end quickly. They brought on too many people and the work ended quickly, and okay, we're gonna, and I need to keep working. Well, so this is where the swapping stuff come in. You could swap with a seasonal temporarily. Somebody wanted to get furloughed, just extend your season or something. Maybe somebody said, I'm sick of this. I want done. I want to go. I don't want to work anymore this season. I'll swap with this person. If that person's qualified, they can do that. So that's kind of when the swaps have come in, but they've only been like to extend a season for say, or somebody, who wants to, work longer. And we've also like, for purposes of like health insurance eligibility, when at one point, like, the season, I remember when you got, it was really short. It was like almost, it barely made it to 4 months. We got them to agree to let people burn their annual or they're sick to get the month their season extended so they could continue, with the health insurance and have the agency pay their premium, the government's premium, and the employee's premium while they were on furlough, and then they pay when they got back. But most of the issues that we've seen, the more complicated issues that we've seen, after we worked through these other ones were, a lot of it, was like overtime eligibility issues, and could you be on the same list with the perms, or could you work overtime? If they furloughed a bunch of people and there was overtime available, why shouldn't they, either like let these seasonals come back and be on that list, to work, or, and if it came in like they were working like 50-hour weeks, obviously they're going to get recalled and earn that overtime. Do the, Let me ask you this. Do you know if like the seasonals, I don't know what the work schedules are, but do the seasonals there, do you work 24-hour shifts? Are there some jobs that go 24/7 that have to be covered?
Um, there are some parks that are open 24 hours. Are you asking if are there any shifts that are 24 hours?
Well, no, 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 no. I mean, so there's shifts, and so you work, let's say you work, days, afternoons, and nights, what we call them. So if I'm working, let's say I'm working, 10, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I mean, are there shifts like that there?
Oh, I mean,
And
there
if there
are
are,
emergency services
do you
folks
get night
who
shift?
work all around the clock.
Okay. So they get all their night differentials and they get all that stuff too, right? Their premium pays for weekends and all that kind of stuff. That's not an issue for you guys?
It sounds like yes, that those are largely aren't an issue. That it could, our emergency services dispatch, those kind of folks are getting those night differentials and
Okay. All right. So they get all that stuff. Okay. So, all right. Because we had,
um
se- you know, we because a lot of these operations we in the seasonals worked, we had three shift they were 24/7 operations. So, you had to pick a shift and and how you got a shift was based on seniority and all that. For purposes of
Yeah, I
being
think the
leased,
majority of positions are do
you
not work.
know,
Yeah.
okay. So, but to get back to your question, the purpose of being released, from the work schedule. Um, it's usually, we based it for a long time on seniority. That was, so the most senior stayed the longest. And we had a big dispute, among, and this is how when we bargain contracts, we have to listen to our members. And a lot of members, were like, some of the seasons didn't want to work that long, and this was not that seniority issue wasn't as important anymore. So we make it a combination of like your years of service and your appraisal. And seasonals had their own a pool, with the appraisal stuff. They were included in the awards pool. We negotiate an awards pool that's 2% of salary that the agency has to put into a pool of awards to give to people based on their performance appraisals. And seasonals and the permanents are together for that. And we don't
Okay.
have a separate pool for seasonals, which
All
is how
right,
we
I got,
liked it. It kind of keeps everybody together.
and it sounds like that's what the members wanted.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
we're not going to, well, we have to, when we bargain a contract, we survey the members, like what's important to you? What's your issue?
right.
You know, and sometimes when, at one place it's not an issue, another place it is. But it could be, we navigate all that, when we negotiate the contracts, and the contracts are negotiated by like staff people like me, as maybe the chief negotiator. But the team is all the local leaders who are on the ground and know what's going on,
Yeah.
and usually know more about what's going on than the people the management brings to the table.
That is
And
such true. Yes.
we do a good job with
And
them.
I'm
Yeah.
sure that the folks on this call definitely can relate to that, to knowing more about what's going on the
Right.
ground in their work site than their managers do.
Right.
So, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll open it up to Q&A for participants. And I think this kind of leads in from what we were just talking about from it's our members who get to participate in bargaining and helping us
Yeah.
drive the priorities, people who have signed that 1187. Um, are seasonal employees who have signed the 1187 considered full members of NTEU? Do
Absolutely.
they have access
Absolutely.
to union benefits that are offered to permanent employees? And can they run for
Yeah.
union office? Can they be stewards, participate in bargaining?
All of the above. Yeah. We don't differentiate, between your work schedule. You do the work, you do bargaining work, whether you're there for 6 months or whether you're there for, you know, and when you're furloughed and you're not paying dues during that
Yep.
period of time,
Non-pay
but
status,
it's not,
non-due
but
pay
it's not like you
days
come
paid.
back, we
Yep.
don't ask you to, right. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's good to
I mean,
clarify.
as a practical matter, we do, so at one point we did have, I know one chapter that had like a VP just for seasonals, because
Yeah.
if seasonals, if you want to run for office in the union, but you're going to be furloughed for 6 months doing something else, then, you may not be available to help, the membership and to, do all the work you got to do as the president. But yeah, but seasonals have they're all the rights and benefits.
All right. Now going to open it up to questions from the audience. If anyone, if you want to come off of mute and want to raise your hand, feel free to ask questions out loud. I'm going to scroll to the top of the chat and see like what questions we have missed. So starting with actually, I think the very first question was if right now it sounds like seasonal time does not count towards retirement. Is this something that NTEU could advocate for seasonal time also counting towards people's retirement?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so I'm assuming that you're these all these seasonal appointments we're talking about are term appointments. Is that correct?
Michelle, do you want to clarify? I see Perry gave a thumbs up.
Based upon what you're
Yeah,
telling me, it sounds like they're
yeah, I
term
think it
appointments.
is term, but we just like colloquially call it seasonals here, the 5 months, 29 days.
Right,
But it sounds like
right.
they're term appoint. We also have term appointments that last for longer, like a year or two, and I think that's where the confusion lies. But
Yeah, because you all use
Yeah.
the term as
Well,
well.
and term appointments can go up to 4 years
right.
under OPM regulations. So
I
if they're
think
just
like
if they're
temporary appointment is the
Temporary.
technical term.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
so it does sound
so
like then our understanding is that it's these situations where people are being rehired and that time is not counting at the end of their career towards retirement that they spent in seasonal.
Correct. It does count towards our annual leave increasing. Like I just did counting my first year as a permanent and my 2 total years as seasonal, I got upgraded to like 6 hours of leave. However,
okay.
the time in seasonal, so those first 2 years do not count for retirement benefits. And a lot of people wonder, is there a way to even retroactively count those? Because that will make a massive difference to thousands of
Sure,
employees. So,
sure. Um, is there a way to do that? Well, I have to look at your appointment documents and see, exactly if you were one of those terms that you call them what 1039, is that what you call them? And you had a 6 month term appointment and you had, and you were done in 5 months and 29 days. I'd have looked at those retirement regulations, but you're probably not. But see that those assume that you're only going to be there for 6 months and you're not going to come right back again. I mean, there's this concept called tacking, that you use, like okay, it's in some of the regulations. Like if you work without a break in service with a break in service for like 5 days or less, it all counts towards your time. So I'd have to do a deeper dive into that to answer that. It doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right to me. Um, but I need to do more homework before I give you an answer on that.
Okay, thanks. But it definitely
Sorry.
sounds like something that we can say that
Oh,
we
I
would want
want
to
to
look
look at that. This
into
is just,
and we
it's
think is
like it's
yeah.
like it's like, what's this, I don't I mean I'm one of the things I'm really not trying to do is go as lawyer up in you guys and all that, but it's like basically it walks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, quacks like a duck. This sounds like, you should be that. You should be getting that. And that's the reason probably why they're finagling the system, so they don't want to pony up for, the
Yeah.
retirement.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
the
which
comments are
is
filling up with people are saying 15, 17 seasons that aren't going to count for them. Um, just a lot of time. So it's a big
wow.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that would most likely require a fix either out of, OPM promulgating regulations, which we've done that. We've been successful in a number of situations, or a legislative fix. But this is the kind of stuff that needs to be brought to the attention of people, yeah, because I don't think, and I have to look at the paperwork more. I don't want to speculate. I'm sorry.
No, I think that that's great. Thank you so much for engaging on that, Mike. All right, Adam, I'm looking at your questions. They are long, so give me a second. If you want to come off of mute, if there's a way to consolidate questions here, happy to hear. These are definitely some high level
So,
questions,
so okay.
but if you don't want to come off of
Yeah,
mute,
it was just basically if you're asking about, yeah, it's one big question. It's all the same thing. Um, I guess my concern, uh, which also affects seasonals as well, or anybody that is looking for health coverage. Um, how can I summarize this? Um, with NTEU, having also pushed for the CR. Um, my concern is, we've got a lot of the ACA changes that are coming up that are going to affect the entire healthcare marketplace. including with federal workers. So I was just looking to see what NTEU might be doing to protect, what we've got to try to help keep our healthcare costs down, or if there's like a larger overall strategy, for that, considering, after NTU also helped to push the CR, that also means that, the strategy of the current administration is essentially to shrink the workforce. It's like NTU is not going to have too many people to represent if we unless we start moving in a different direction. Does that make sense?
Well, I think I hear what you're saying. I mean, obviously, this we didn't take the position, that the Democrats shouldn't negotiate, and they need to go for the, ACA and get rid of the exclusions. We said both sides do your job and get, back to work. Okay. I mean, the vast majority of federal employees and the vast majority of employees that we represent don't have to worry about the ACA for their own health benefits because they're covered by the federal system. And NTU, we do not get involved with issues that don't involve federal employment. We don't take positions on nuclear proliferation. We focus our complete energies on what's in the best interest for federal employees. I mean, from our perspective, the issue that I'm hearing from you is that if they're abusing this term system and people aren't getting retirement benefits, people aren't being able to get health insurance, people are you're basically getting paid by the hour and maybe accruing some leave, and you have to reapply for your job every 6 months, and you're a federal employee and you were in our national parks, and that's bullshit. And they're abusing that system, and we need to change that, how they're using that system to, I think, abuse their authority. So that's where we would come from with that, as opposed to trying to get you the ability to get ACA. We would want you to be able to get the FEHB system. And when you're furloughed, have the agency pay your premium while you're furloughed, like all the other people that we represent. And then when you come back, negotiate, a payment plan over 6 months so you don't get hit with a big, bill and have to pay it back in the first, paycheck. That's what we would do.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
that's how we operate.
I'll also add that I believe that NTEU's message was that we wanted full funding of agencies as well. That we are looking for NPS to they're not just to be these continuing resolutions, that we want agencies to be fully funded again, and that we want to make sure that uh, we I had a statement there and now I lost my train of thought reading that question. But I do know that that was something else. Let me look. We're getting towards the end of the hour, but we've still got a bunch of questions. While I'm looking in the chat, is there anyone who wanted to raise their hand and ask a question or ask one that they had in the chat? Some of this we've already gotten to, so I'm just navigating and going through.
One question that I have is, as far as as far as I understand it, the Forest Service converted a lot of their 1039 temporary appointment positions to career seasonal, career conditional, like perm subject to furlough. I believe it's all synonyms. Last year, of course, a lot of those people got fired because they were probationary, and I have heard that federal unions were key in pushing for that. I assume NIFI.
Yes.
Yeah, like how does that happen? What sort of pressure can unions exert? Like how could NTEU and or other federal unions hypothetically do that for the Park Service?
Well, I mean, like, you saw those issues probably with, for the firefighters, right? Just exposing, how hazardous their work is, how shitty they're getting paid, that, and like elevating that to Congress. Some of that needs an act of Congress. I mean, with respect to the Forest Service issues, I can find out more about exactly how they worked. I heard that, and why they did that. I mean, what we try to do, when we did it with the IRS, and I'm pretty sure it happened, at the Forest Service as well. Um, is that this it makes it's a business practice. It's a smart business practice to do this because we're gonna lose people, and it's the right thing to do. And keeping people um, employed, that are showing this kind of loyalty and this kind of talent, we could lose them. We want them to stay here. This is how they should be treated. We're gonna get a bigger bang for our buck in the long run out of this. Paying their retirement or paying that really. I mean, it's a line item in the budget. Just put it in the budget, and Congress will give it to you, and the union will support that when you go up there. And so I think that's part of what happened, with them. And that's really kind of what happened, after a number of years, with the Internal Revenue Service in terms of staffing issues. We finally got, this bill to add all this money and add all this technology and all these hires. And during that process, before when the agencies when they were broke, they converted a lot of those seasons because because I mean, under how they I would like to see how they put your temp on FTEs on the big like how when they go does a temp 1039 temp count as like point 0.5 FTE or something less because they're abusing their staffing numbers is I think what they're doing with that
Yeah, I don't
when
know
they
if we
go to
have
they
any
go start
budget folks on the
authorization for
call,
budget.
but
And
yeah,
where's that
but
money going? And where's that money
well,
going?
so one thing that came up in the chat, and that has come up in a lot of conversations is one thing that NTEU is going to have to do is to really get a grasp on NPS funding because some
Yeah.
of these 1039 positions apparently can be soft funded, they can be fee funded, and so they're not necessarily
Right.
appropriated funds. And so once we get into
Oh, so
that,
they, so yeah, but there's user fees. Yeah, okay, that fund some of the positions. Where's that money going? I mean, we have a dedicated group of lobbyists who actually testify on every single agency appropriation bill and analyze it, with the staff, and we come and they invite us to come up and comment on it and say what do we really need, and because we have a lot of credibility with these agencies, you know. Customs and Border Protection being one we've made a huge impact on their staffing by basically saying, that they move commerce. Every piece of cargo coming into this country has to go through these folks. And if it's sitting, in Long Beach, rotten, and we don't get the staffing there, the economy isn't moving. And we've convinced them to do that. And they also, and they get user fees as well. So, I mean, yeah, we have the capacity to analyze these budgets and testify for the Hill and question, the agency's authority to do that. And we've been doing that for a long time. And we've been pretty successful at, pointing out the problems. And it'd be real interesting to see like really how they're using, the large numbers of, you know, that's why we like to, quite honestly, we like to get large units, like we represent a wall-to-wall unit of the 30,000 people at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Law enforcement, 25,000 number or so, and then, the trade folks. The other unit, the IRS unit we've gone on about, you probably don't want to hear it anymore. It's like, that's like 70,000. But all our other units, like the 5 RE agencies, they're wall to wall. So we can speak for everybody in the agency. And when we go up there, we can speak with authority, and have the big picture.
I think that's a really great way to close us out because I think that really relates to what this movement is about. We're forming unions at the regional level with the plan to bring those regions together for a nationwide unit
Right.
so that we can have power, so that NPS employees can join together, have power, can stand in
Yeah.
solidarity, and really be heard in a different way than just part by part.
Well, right. And that's how we've organized, and that's how unions have organized always. We have, we normally, in one of the others, we do region by region by region. And then we bargain a regional contract, we a multi-region contract, and we consolidate the unit and do it like that. And that's how we've done in virtually all our agencies that are the size of this and so geographically dispersed. So it's a process, but it's the long game. But it's it's rewarding, and it takes a lot of courage to get involved. And I'm grateful that you all came tonight, and hopefully you got a couple questions answered that will help you. And I'm sure if you have more, you give them to Amy, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. Appreciate you
Well,
all.
thanks so much for being here, Mike. Really appreciate all of the knowledge that you were able to share with folks. Thanks everyone who joined us. We will get this recording up on our playlist tomorrow, so you can share that link out to folks who were not able to make it tonight. Thank you all. If you had a question that didn't get answered, please feel free to reach out to me or to Stephanie if you're in the Pacific West region. And we will be happy to get those answers back to you all. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you for all the service you do for our